Today we're taking a deep dive into a really important Phase 3 clinical trial, just published in the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. We're going to be looking at a potential new treatment for adolescent ADHD called Centanafadine. So, here's our game plan. We're going to walk through this study exactly as it was published. We'll start with the background and what the researchers were trying to achieve. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the trial design, look at the core results, examine the crucial safety data, and finally, wrap up with what this all means for doctors and patients.
All right, first up, the background and objective. Why was the study even necessary? What's the problem they were trying to solve?
Well, treating ADHD in teenagers comes with its own set of challenges. As they get older and more independent, it can be tough to stick with medication, especially if there are side effects from traditional stimulants or if they just don't like that feeling of not being themselves. So there's a real need for treatments that are easier to tolerate. That's where Centanafadine comes in. It has this novel mechanism. It's what's called a triple reuptake inhibitor, targeting not just norepinephrine and dopamine, but serotonin as well. The thinking is that this broader approach might help with a wider range of symptoms, maybe even things like emotional regulation and executive function.
So, the main goal of the study was crystal clear. They wanted to rigorously test the effectiveness and safety of 2 different doses of Centanafadine against a placebo. And they did this over a 6-week period, specifically in adolescents between the ages of 13 and 17.
Okay, now let's talk about how they actually designed the study. This was a Phase 3 randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, which, is the gold standard for proving if a drug really works.
You can see the whole structure right here. First, researchers screened teenagers aged 13 to 17 who had a confirmed diagnosis of moderate to severe ADHD. Once they found eligible participants, they were randomly assigned in a 1:1:1 ratio to one of 3 groups, a low dose of Centanafadine, a high dose, or a placebo. The really important part is that this was a 6-week double-blind treatment period. That means neither the patients nor the doctors knew who was getting the real drug and who was getting the placebo. After those 6 weeks, there was a final 1-week safety checkup. So how did they measure success? Well, the main yardstick, the primary endpoint, was the change in their ADHD rating scale, or ADHD RS5 score. This is a standard tool that measures core symptoms. But they also looked at other key things, like the Clinical Global Impression of Severity score and the Conners 3-parent scale, which gives you really valuable feedback on things like executive functioning. So who were the participants? In total, 459 adolescents were randomized into the study, and impressively, almost 81% of them finished it. Now, what's absolutely crucial here is that at the very beginning of the trial, all 3 groups were perfectly matched. They had similar ages, gender distribution, and symptom severity. This ensures that any differences we see at the end are due to the treatment, not some other factor. Okay, now we get to the part everyone wants to know, the primary efficacy results. Let's answer the big question. Did the medication actually work? And the answer is yes, but specifically for the higher dose. By the end of the 6 weeks, the 328.8 milligram dose led to an average symptom reduction of 18.5 points on that ADHD scale. Compared to the 14.15-point reduction with placebo, this was a statistically significant improvement with a p-value of 0.0006, which is a big deal. The lower dose, however, did not show a statistically significant difference from placebo on this main measure. What's really striking when you look at this graph is just how fast the effect kicked in. See how the line for the higher dose breaks away from the placebo line? That happens as early as week 1, the very first time they measured after starting treatment. This kind of rapid onset is so important clinically because it helps build a patient's confidence in the treatment right from the get-go. And the benefits didn't just stop at the core symptoms. The higher dose also showed significant improvements in the global severity score. And on top of that, the parent ratings on the Conners 3 scale showed major gains in attention, hyperactivity, and, this is a big one, executive functioning. This is pretty strong evidence that the drug has a broad effect across different areas of impairment.
So what does all this data mean for an actual patient? Well, this responder analysis really helps put it into perspective. Almost 70% of the teenagers on the higher dose saw at least a 30% reduction in their symptoms. And even more impressively, nearly half of them, 47%, achieved a 50% reduction. We're talking about really substantial, life-changing improvements here.
Of course, effectiveness is only half the picture. Any treatment also has to be safe and something patients can actually tolerate. So let's switch gears and dive into the safety analysis.
This table gives us the top-line safety numbers, and you can see there was a dose-dependent increase in what we call treatment-emergent adverse events, or TEAEs. It went from about 24% on placebo up to 50% on the high dose, but, and this is a really important but, very few people actually stopped the trial because of these side effects, only 3.3% in the high-dose group. Most importantly, there were no serious adverse events or deaths in any of the groups.
So what were these side effects? The most common ones were decreased appetite and nausea, and the vast majority of all these events were mild or moderate. Now, for complete transparency, there were only 3 severe events across all 451 participants who got treatment. 1 case of increased liver function tests and 1 of aggression in the low-dose group, and 1 case of sleepiness in the placebo group.
The safety assessment also covered other critical areas, and the news here is very reassuring. They found no evidence of withdrawal symptoms when the medication was stopped abruptly. The study also found no clinically meaningful changes in things like heart rate and blood pressure, no concerning ECG findings, and no difference in suicidality trends between any of the groups.
So, let's pull all of this together. What's the final verdict? What's the clinical significance of these findings? This summary table really paints the whole picture perfectly. You can clearly see a dose-response relationship. As the dose goes up, the effectiveness on both the primary and secondary measures improves. At the same time, the safety burden, the rate of side effects, also increases. This gives clinicians a really clear view of the risk-benefit trade-off for this potential medication.
And this brings us to 3 key take-home messages. First, Centanafadine at that 328.8 milligram dose works. It significantly reduces ADHD symptoms in adolescents, and it starts working fast. Second, its benefits are broad spectrum. They go beyond just core symptoms to help with things like executive functioning. And third, the treatment is generally safe and well tolerated, with a side effect profile that is predictable and mostly mild to moderate.
So, what's next? Well, while these are very promising results from a really well-run 6-week study, there are still some key questions left. Future research will need to see if these benefits hold up over the long term. And critically, we need to know how Centanafadine stacks up in direct, head-to-head trials against other established ADHD treatments. This study provides a fantastic foundation, but the clinical story of Centanafadine is really just beginning.